What's up and welcome back. I'm George. Today we're talking about staging yards on the Model Railroad Show. All right, staging yards. Today we're going to talk about really 5 things that a staging yard can add to your layout and really why you should incorporate one into your layout design. And honestly, if you're building a model railroad for the first time, this may not be something that you have considered, but I'm telling you now, it's something that you should consider. This is why when we talk about, model railroad design, we talk about having an interchange track or room to expand or a track that leads off the layout. It's because you can add this type of interest to your layout, being a staging yard. So what is a staging yard? Basically, a staging yard is considered like, I consider it a behind the scenes set of tracks where trains can come and go from, and they can come onto and leave the layout, the visible part of the layout, either through a backdrop or behind like a mountain or through a tunnel or what have you. And this gives people and operators the impression that your layout connects to a larger rail network or like the outside world. Okay, so that's what really like my personal definition of a staging yard is. 5 reasons really why you need one. First, enhanced operations. And right now, this may not be terribly important to you. You're like, I'm building a 4x8 on a sheet of plywood, an HO scale. I'm building an N scale layout on a door. And both of those track plans are probably going to have track plans where you can watch trains go in a circle, which is very enjoyable. I'm not knocking it. Always good to have a piece of track, though, that either goes behind the scenes or maybe leads off if you don't really have a behind the scenes in your layout. It kind of leads off the layout, tracks that lead off, and I'll explain that, how you incorporate staging there in a bit. Enhanced operations, trains coming and going. You can have trains, come from the south and stop and drop stuff off in your layout and head north, trains that run straight through. This adds to a good amount of variety. If you have people coming over, and inevitably, if you have a model railroad layout, you have family over, people are going to come down and see the layout. You can have a variety of trains running through. You can run a freight through, and then you can run a passenger train through. And these trains come from, one side of the layout, and they'll come onto the layout and exit off the other side of the layout, whether that's a bend or what have you. Better traffic flow. It allows your model railroad not to have trains like jammed up on sidings or trains like clogging up the main line. It allows a nice smoother operation of your model railroad. Even if you're not heavy into operating, it'll add to, the smoothness of how your railroad at least looks like it operates and runs. Okay. If you want to start to get into operating, realistic scheduling. So now you can have trains, you can build yourself a little bit of a timetable, or really, it doesn't have to be a timetable. It can be a sequence table where, one train comes in and then the train leaves and the next train comes in, that type of thing. It's like once this happens, then this happens. And that's like sequence operations, which we can talk about later. That will allow trains to come in, leave the railroad, sometimes do a job on the railroad, whether it's come into the yard. Last video we talked about yards. You can have a train come in from staging onto your arrival departure track. It can then, drop off a few cars. Doesn't have to drop off everything. Switcher can take a few cars off the train, put them onto the classification tracks to be delivered at industries that are on your railroad, and then maybe a couple of trains are outbound for that train. That direction can be added to that train, and then that train heads off on its way. And something that simple, and you've just created operation on your layout. And a staging yard really allows you to do that. Flexibility. Staging yards they can be for train storage, right? They can be, like mini classification yards off scene where you have a dispatcher that'll be, putting trains together to run onto the main layout or onto the main stage, as we would say. And sometimes they're fiddle yards where you'll take trains, and I have a drawer with foam in it, and we'll take trains and add trains to the tracks and the staging, and then those trains will go onto the layout, and maybe some trains coming off will then be taken off the railroad. This way, during an operating session, you have some variety of rolling stock. Keeps the operation interesting. So it does give you a lot of flexibility. So staging yard, staging yard, staging yard. And if you watch popular layout designers, Jerry Leone, David Pop, almost all of the project model railroads that you see these guys put together for model railroader have some type of staging, whether it was the Red Oak where they had some staging behind a backdrop. You can have a couple of different types of staging yards. You can have hidden staging like I have, and you can see my hidden staging. You know, we have train tracks coming in from one end and the other. Some tracks are stub ended, and I have one track with a siding there that allows for through running. And I can have, you know, exchange trains just running straight around the layout in a circle. So that was important to me when I designed it. I wanted to be able to have consistently run a train all the way around the layout, and you can build that into your staging yard. Hidden staging yard, it's what I have. It's what I like. I think it allows a lot of, you know, operational variability and interest to your layout. Some people have visible staging yards, and I'm sure we'll get some comments here because there are the purists out there that will say if your tracks are visible on a layout or on the stage, they're not actually staging, they're part of the layout. So, but there are visible staging yards. And then stub end versus pass through. Like I said, some staging yards some railroads will have staging at either end of the railroad, and they could be two stub end staging yards. If you're running diesels, you really don't need to turn trains or anything like that. So, very, very plausible idea. To add a staging yard, though, again, the easiest way to add a staging yard is to incorporate it into your layout planning in the beginning. Say, hey, George, I really don't have room for a staging yard. Say you have an interchange track, and everybody who talks about layout design and talks about expansion, adding an interchange track, doing these types of things. You can actually, and Model Railroader has done this many times, you can have a cassette staging yard, which basically has one leg which bolts up to the end of your model railroad. They ran Winston-Salem southbound, had a cassette staging yard. The Beer Line had a cassette staging yard. So they've had a number of railroads with cassette staging yards. It works. It doesn't take up room. You can fold it down when you're done, and it can have, you know, 2 or 3 tracks on it, and that's going to add a lot of interest. Yeah, 5 things. Staging yard can completely change, you know, the experience of your model railroad. And, you know, there's a reason a lot of us talk about adding to that experience, because while I'm not knocking running trains going on circles, and undoubtedly I will probably do a project layout in Z-scale on this channel where trains will run in circles. You know, when it comes to, you know, your layout, you're probably going to get a little bored of that. And that's why we're always talking about keeping your interest, you know, keeping the hobby growing for yourself. And that's really what a staging yard can add to this. Let me know if you found this interesting. Let me know if you found it helpful. Let me know if you have a staging yard on your layout, or if until this video you haven't even considered that. Hit that subscribe button, the bell, give me a thumbs up. All right. I'll catch you in the next one.